Good evening, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this Henriette van Lynden lecture. It's a pleasure to see you all tonight in the Rode Hoed. I'm Karin Wester of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I will be moderating the debate tonight. Two general points before we get started. First, I would like to remind you to turn off the ringtones of your mobile phones. And secondly, a few words of introduction about the nature of tonight's lecture. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs organizes and moderates the Henriette van Lynden lectures. Yet, as regular attendees know, the views expressed and the perspectives conveyed during these lectures do not represent the official views of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Our objective is to facilitate a well-informed debate on current topics in the Middle East. This has been the case for years, and this is also the case tonight. Of course, we are well aware that many of you have strong feelings about the subject of tonight's lecture, and understandably so. Yet, what we want to do is to offer a platform for a constructive debate, which will provide us with food for thought, and hopefully with some ideas about possible ways forward. That is our intention. And we are counting on you in the audience to appreciate this and help us to uphold a civilized and constructive discussion. Having said that, I would like to thank you all for turning out in great numbers to attend this evening. Your presence goes to show the relevance of this topic. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, past, present, and prospects. In a region which has certainly not seen a shortage of wars and bloodshed, even less so in recent years, this particular conflict stands out, sadly so, for its long and troubled history. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, a statement of British support made in 1917 for, quote, the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, end quote. A statement which at the same time recognized that it was, quote, clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, end quote. In November of this year, it is also 70 years ago that in 1947, the partition plan for Palestine was adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. And in addition, this forthcoming June, it is 50 years ago that the 1967 Six-Day War between Israel and neighboring Arab countries was fought. By extension, this year, 2017, also marks 50 years of occupation of Palestinian territories. Meanwhile, notwithstanding the long-lasting nature of the conflict, a sustainable solution seems to become ever more elusive. The two-state solution, which has since long been the objective of any peace process, has been seen as faltering by persons involved and observers alike. The question is if it can be preserved at the 11th hour, and what, if any, would be the possible alternatives. So that is what we will be focusing on tonight. Past, present, and in particular, what are the prospects, given the current circumstances, to realize sustainable peace. We will now turn our attention to the three excellent speakers who will share their views and experiences with us tonight: Robert Serry, Ahmed Khaledi, and Ari Shavit. We are delighted that all three of them were able to join us for this lecture. And let me now introduce the first speaker to you, Ari Shavit. Mr. Shavit is an Israeli writer and journalist. He served as a paratrooper in the Israel Defense Forces and studied philosophy at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. In the 1980s, Mr. Shavit wrote for the progressive weekly Koteret Rashid. In the early 1990s, he was chairperson of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel. In 1995, he joined the newspaper Haaretz to serve in the editorial board. In 2013, Mr. Shavit published his book, My Promised Land: The Triumph and Tragedy of Israel, which received widespread acclaim and was a New York Times bestseller. Shavit called his book a personal odyssey of one Israeli who is bewildered by the historic drama engulfing his homeland. He writes in the introduction, "Now, the challenge goes far beyond that of occupation and much deeper than the issue of peace. What we all face is the threefold Israel question. Why Israel? What is Israel? Will Israel?" According to The Economist, the book is spellbinding, and Shavit's prophetic voice carries lessons that all sides need to hear. And the historian Simon Schama, whom we know well in the Netherlands, wrote, "Shavit's accomplishment is so unlikely, so total, that it makes you believe anything is possible. Even, God help us, peace in the Middle East." Mr. Shavit, you now have the floor. Please give Ari Shavit a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. I apologize that tonight, when I speak now, I will be relying on my papers, my notes, which I usually do not do, because it's such an important evening. I hope that later on, during the discussion, I'll be somewhat more spontaneous, the way I like to be. This is an exceptional evening for me. Last October, I had decided, in painful circumstances, to suspend my public journalistic activity. In the time that has passed since, I went through a deep process of profound reflection and contemplation, hoping to become a better and more humble person. This process is not over. By 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. tonight, I will go back to my cheshbon nefesh, self-reckoning process, checking and trying to improve myself, my values, and my moral commitments. But as I have such deep admiration for Holland and such deep respect for the institution of these lectures, I've decided I cannot say no to the fine people who've asked me to speak tonight. They asked me to talk about the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, the 50th anniversary of occupation, and the future of the Promised Land. The Balfour Declaration On November 2nd, 1917, the then Foreign Minister of Britain, Lord Balfour, sent a letter to Lord Rothschild. The letter included a short statement which dramatically changed history. At the heart of the statement was an 18-word sentence. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. This sentence was later adopted in different versions by the League of Nations that created later on the British Mandate, which led to the UN resolution of 1947 that led to the birth of my nation. Hence, I understand why my dear friend Ahmed Khaledi may feel that the Balfour Declaration brought catastrophe upon his people. I do see his point, but I will share with you my point of view. The sin, the primordial sin of the Jewish liberation movement is not that we went back to our ancient land of Israel/Palestine after the declaration of November 2nd, 1917. The real sin is that we went there too late. Had we gone there earlier, had some sort of Balfour Declaration been issued by the Turkish Empire in 1897, had we established the State of Israel in 1928 rather than in 1948, millions and millions and millions of human beings would have been saved. Among them, Anna Frank and her family. Among them, over 100,000 Dutch men and Dutch women, Dutch children, Dutch boys and Dutch girls who were murdered on European soil just because they had been Jewish. So as you can understand, I'm a proud Israeli. I believe that, a bit like Holland, Israel is a man-made miracle. It's a true human endeavor and a remarkable human phenomenon expressing the triumph of the human spirit, saving a people that was facing death at the very last moment. And I do believe that just like the Swedes and the Danes and the Dutch, the Jews have a right for self-determination. Like every other people, we have both the need and the right to have a place that we can call home. We must have a land and a nation that will allow us to live our life, maintain our identity, nurture our culture, and speak our language. But so do the Palestinians. Like the Swedes, the Danes, the Dutch, and the Israelis, the Palestinians have their right for self-determination. Like every other people, they have the need and the right to have a place they will call home. They must have a land and a nation that will allow them to live their life, maintain their identity, nurture their culture, and speak their language. This is why I believe that the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza that began 49 years, 9 months, and 3 weeks ago is Israel's most colossal, historic, moral, and political mistake. My liberty should never be synonymous with Ahmed Khaledi's oppression. The legitimate independence of my people should never rhyme with the political destruction of the Palestinian people. While at its core Israel is a wonder, the decision to maintain control over the West Bank and build numerous settlements was horrendous. The 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War is the 50th anniversary of Israel's tragic and disastrous march of folly. And yet, Israel is not the only one that committed folly. Let us remember what is often forgotten. In 1993, under the leadership of the late Yitzhak Rabin and the late Shimon Peres, Israelis chose dialogue, but the outcome was terror. In 2000, the Israelis tried peace, but the outcome was horrible suicide bomb. In 2005, Israelis dismantled all the settlements in the Gaza Strip. The outcome was rockets on Tel Aviv. And from the Palestinian point of view, after Oslo, settlements. After Camp David, death of thousands and more settlements. Up to this very day, settlements, settlements, settlements. So we all failed. And after running into the wall once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, it's time to realize there is a wall there. Never mind who is guilty, Palestinians or Israelis or Europeans or Americans or God. What we've tried time after time has failed in a dramatic way. Trying to be more attentive, I'm open to any creative, realistic idea that will help us and save us. But let me share with you my initial thoughts about how we should and can address this horrendous, great problem. 1, there is no other way but the two-state way. If we choose a one-state approach, the outcome will either be old South Africa or new Syria or both. It will lead to horrible, horrible bloodshed. 2, the problem with the two-state solution is the word solution. Sadly, there is no way to end the conflict overnight, and there is no way to reach a comprehensive peace agreement within a year. There isn't the secret formula, the 5 more words, the 2 more percent, the 5 more settlements that will usher in a perfect peace. 3, therefore, we must, in my mind, be thinking about a new approach based on the following 5 principles. Endorse in a real, committed way the two-state vision. Keep the two-state option open. Launch a real two-state process. Create gradually a two-state state, and build a wide international coalition of Americans, Europeans, Chinese, Japanese, Russians, Arabs, and others that will help Israelis and Palestinians advance this process and change the reality on the ground for real. Let me emphasize one point here. The new fashion is to talk about a regional solution, the so-called outside-in approach. And indeed, there is a rare opportunity, because never have in the past have so many Arab leaders and government been so close to Israel. Fearing Iran, ISIS, radicalism, so many of these Arab leaderships look at Israel and say, we don't like these guys, but they are our more reasonable neighbor. There's a real potential there. But two words of caution. One, these pragmatic leaders have less legitimacy than the Arab leaders had in the past. Not one of them has the strength and legitimacy that Anwar Sadat had when he did peace with Menachem Begin, or when King Hussein had done peace, signed peace with Yitzhak Rabin. So the chances that they can actually sign an end of conflict agreement with Israel, making concessions in Jerusalem, is not there. Two, for moral and political reasons, the Palestinians cannot and should not be ignored, cornered, or overruled. At the end of the day, at the heart of the matter is the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. We must look each other in the eye and deal with it. Hence, what I see as the third way forward is a gradual, cautious, but determined step-by-step track that will begin with a settlement freeze and a Marshall Plan for the West Bank and Gaza. Following that, we must create a real autonomous space for the Palestinians that would grow politically, geographically, and economically as the Palestinians advance in a nation-building process with the help of the international community. As Israel stops settlements and tries to end occupation, and as the Palestinians build a prosperous, life-loving, and hopefully democratic Palestine, the two sides will lay the foundations for a future comprehensive peace deal. One of the many things I love about your wonderful Amsterdam is your cycling. So let me leave you, as I finish my words, with an image or a metaphor. In the past, we tried the all or nothing approach. We either nourished a poisonous status quo, which is really suicidal, or we tried to get on a Harley Davidson, riding quickly, rushing to the summit, to the hilltop, and then falling into the abyss. What I suggest is that we will try to get on a bicycle and ride slowly but surely, with determination and commitment, toward the summit of peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ari Shavit, and thank you also for your kind words about our Dutch bicycles. It is appreciated. Our second speaker tonight is Ahmed Khaledi. Ahmed Khaledi is a senior associate member of St. Anthony's College, University of Oxford, and a former Palestinian negotiator. He has been active in Palestinian politics for over 30 years. Mr. Khaledi served as advisor to the Palestinian delegation at the Madrid-Washington peace talks in 1991-1993, and a senior advisor on security to the Cairo-Taba PLO-Israeli talks in 1993. He has been a senior advisor to Palestinian Authority Presidents Arafat and Abbas, and he has served as consultant on Middle East affairs to various European governments. Mr. Khaledi was co-chair of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences of its project on Israeli-Palestinian security in the 1990s, and associate fellow of the Middle East program at Chatham House. He has written widely on Middle Eastern political and strategic affairs, regional security, and the Palestinian cause. His books which are many of them co-written with Hussein Aga, include Track to Diplomacy, Lessons from the Middle East, and a framework for a Palestinian national security doctrine, published in 2006. Mr. Khaledi is currently editor-in-chief of the Arabic version of the Journal of Palestine Studies, published by the Institute for Palestine Studies. Please give Ahmed Khaledi a warm welcome.
Thank you, Karen. Let me first say that it gives me great pleasure to be in this forum named in honor of Baroness von Lynden. I had the pleasure of working with her some 10 years ago and was impressed always by her dedication and by her steely determination to try and facilitate a peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, as well as sharing the occasional cigarette illegally behind the scenes. So it gives me great pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to talk here today. Ladies and gentlemen, where are we and where are we heading? Let's look around. In our region, turmoil and violence and terrorism extending all the way from the eastern borders of Iran to the Horn of Africa. There's seeming chaos in Washington, an EU that looks like it's going to fall apart, Brexit, perhaps Frexit, some people say Grexit, Russia assertive, China ascendant. And as if all of that weren't enough, if we look at our own part of the world, we look at the Palestinians, a polity fractured and divided, an ancient national movement on the cusp of apparent expiry, of old leaders, a bleak domestic landscape, Gaza and Hamas moving out of orbit of the West Bank, some would say in full political secession. And on the other side, we have an Israel in full flight towards the right, various different varieties of the right wing with a new harsh discourse, extreme voices that have been until now largely suppressed, unafraid to speak out. Annexation is now an agenda item, a serious agenda item. This is an unprecedented development since 1967. And we have had no real movement on the Middle East for at least the past 3 or 4 years. The unprecedented effort made by John Kerry came to a dead end in 2014. And all to no good end, except for the final parting shot from John Kerry at Bibi Netanyahu's government on the settlement issue. And now we have Mr. Trump and a morass of uncertainties in Washington. So the question arises, why bother? Indeed, why bother at all, now or in the future? Now, I must say your presence here gives half the answer. I'll try and give the other half. The reason why this conflict hangs like a bad smell over our heads is that it is a unique point of intersection, one of convergence where national, religious, international, political, and historical conflicts meet, clash, and meld together. It has several unique characteristics. It is a moral cause. It is still, in spite of everything, widely perceived as a question of rights and injustice inside and outside the region. The dispossession of the Arabs of Palestine in 1948 has had a profound impact on people's consciousness, all the more so with the 50 years of post-67 occupation. On the religious side, we're talking about the Holy Land, the home to all 3 great world faiths, and its symbols, ever more powerful sources for mobilization, some genuine, some disingenuous. But Palestine has an unrivaled place from the Crusades to the Crimean War, to today's jihadists, and a resonance, Jerusalem, at the heart of Islamic apocalyptic drama. People do not know this. Islamic texts link the end, the eschatological end of the world, to Jerusalem. According to some, the Dajjal, the Antichrist, will reign in Jerusalem. The Mahdi and Jesus will defeat him there. The Kaaba will be transported from Mecca to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will be the last site of judgment and the resurrection, surprisingly congruent with the fundamental Christian apocalyptic views that propel Christian Zionism today. We also have the more recent history of Western intervention and colonialism. The West is linked by its activism and intervention, from Napoleon in Egypt to Tony Blair and George Bush in Iraq, via Sykes-Picot, Balfour, and the making and unmaking of the modern map of the region. Another unrelated but still unique characteristic is that of the history of Western Christian-Jewish relations and the terrible legacy of the Holocaust in particular. Palestine, Israel, is inextricably bound up with this history, and Western policies are compounded by the guilt they have felt towards the Jews and with a growing sense of obligation towards the Palestinians. And there's no doubt, by the way, in my mind, that there has been a shift on this issue over the last few decades. To this, one should add the unique place of Jewish communities in the West and their interest in Israel. This serves to keep the issue alive, for better or for worse, as it were, and no other international issue has the same place on the front pages of the New York Times or the Guardian, and no other leader besides Churchill has had the pleasure of US congressional embrace like Bibi Netanyahu. Indeed, Israel's grip over US politics seems only to be growing via the evangelical right, the Republican mainstream, and the new crossover between them. And for some, the real leader of the real Republican Party is Bibi Netanyahu, not Donald Trump. One can add more. There's the fear of instability, the threat to oil, still a vital commodity, the vast vistas of arms sales and trade, and on the political side, there's still the allure, the elusive prize of peacemaking, the biggest Oscar of them all. And finally, the growing sense that although Palestine may not be at the root of all the region's problems, and that addressing it will not make them all go away, the persistence of this problem will only make things worse. It takes no act of genius to come to the conclusion that a region plus the Palestine conflict is worse off than one without it. Among the many anniversaries marked in 2017, and some have already been mentioned, there's also, by the way, 120 years on Basel, the foundation of the modern Zionist movement. There's 40 years on Sadat, the visit to Jerusalem in 1977. But amongst all these, there is one that people often forget. It's the 80th anniversary of the Peel Commission, the birth of the two-state solution. It has an ancient pedigree even before partition in 1947. Lord Peel's Solomonic judgment is today almost unremarked. It is also, of course, unfulfilled. But his sound characterization of the conflict and the conclusions he drew then are still as valid in 2017 as they were 80 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, if we look at 10 years of Bibi Netanyahu and his 2009 two-state commitment, we see that it has been built on a barricade of no's. Bibi Netanyahu does not accept the 1967 lines plus swaps as a basis for a settlement as universally acknowledged, and has never offered any notion of where the final borders may be. He does not accept that Jerusalem is not the exclusive domain of one people or one faith alone. He does not accept the very idea of a sovereign Palestinian state and insists on maintaining indefinite control over its external borders and its heartland and its basic security, something he just repeated in Washington today. He refuses to acknowledge the need to end and reverse the presence of settlers and settlement on Palestinian land. Indeed, he has insisted that no settler will be removed. He insists that the Palestinians should acknowledge the Zionist narrative as to whom this land belongs, thereby negating their own as a precondition of a lasting peace settlement. He refuses to recognize Israel's role and responsibility that lie at the root of the conflict. And despite all the talk of a regional approach and his new Sunni friends, he has continued to reject the notion of a comprehensive peace as extended by the Arab and Muslim states, incidentally, since 2002. People forget the Arab Peace Initiative was endorsed by the Organization of the Islamic Conference, 57 states altogether. Now, and to add to all of this, and perhaps no surprise, last night we learned that the Trump administration is not wedded to the two-state solution, thereby potentially reversing decades of US policy and the current global, almost unanimous consensus. True, this may not be the best or the fairest basis for a settlement, but it remains the best in the absence of the better. And the alternative is not that of one state or even the growing apartheid reality of today, but the failure of partition in any of its proposed forms, including different variants of a two-state solution, will lead us, willingly or otherwise, back to a full-scale national, ethnic, and ideological conflict over the entire Holy Land as we knew it in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, in clearly different circumstances. The outlook of such a struggle is not an automatic or necessary transition to a unitary or binational state, as some may hope and others may fear, but more towards a protracted period of patchy and recurrent civil and ethnic strife between Arab and Jew with no evident resolution one way or another. Rather than an end to occupation, self-determination, an independent state in the West Bank, or a Jewish and democratic Israel living in peace with its neighbors, without the two-state solution, we will be moving more towards a renewed conflict and struggle over all of Palestine, Israel, between various extreme manifestations of Palestinian nationalism on the one hand and Zionism on the other. As we await the mysterious and magical key of a regional solution that Bibi Netanyahu and seemingly Trump have now seen as the sole path to peace, how exactly the Arabs are going to sell out the Palestinians and reach a deal that the Israelis will accept over the Palestinians' head, I don't really know. But we should be aware that yesterday's remedies may no longer exactly fit the nature of tomorrow's challenge. In spite of all this, I have yet to understand what a workable alternative to the two-state solution looks like, and how this workable alternative is going to defray the dire scenarios that I've sketched above. With the right rampant in Israel, a tragic farcical cloud hanging over the White House, and the rumblings of extremism and strife echoing throughout the region, my fear is that it is more and more likely that we will be gathering at similar meetings in the not-so-distant future, clueless as to what to do and where we are heading. And for all the reasons I have mentioned above, this is a luxury that we cannot afford. The battle today must be to hold the line on the two-state solution, to make every effort to push against its erosion, and to use every tool in its defense. This would now seem to be Europe's battle, perhaps more than anyone else, and it may require new instruments of pressure and the readiness to match diplomatic and political words with diplomatic and political deeds, and it requires a steely political will that has hitherto been absent in talking to both friends and enemies alike. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed Khaledi. Let me now introduce our third speaker to you, Robert Serry. Robert Serry is a Dutch diplomat, a former Dutch diplomat, I should say, who served as the United Nations Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process from 2007 to 2015, as well as the UN Secretary General's personal representative to the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Palestinian Authority. Previously, Mr. Serry served as the Dutch ambassador to Ireland and as the first Dutch ambassador to independent Ukraine. As a diplomat, he also held positions in Bangkok, Moscow, and New York. In addition, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Crisis Management and Operations at NATO. Mr. Serry led the Middle Eastern Division of the Dutch Foreign Ministry, and in the framework of the Netherlands European Community Presidency, he participated in the events leading to the Middle East Peace Conference in Madrid in November 1991. He has published various articles on political and peacekeeping topics, ranging from the Middle East to Eastern Europe. Most recently, in January of this year, he published The Endless Quest for Israeli-Palestinian Peace, a reflection from no man's land. Please give Robert Serry a warm welcome.
Thank you, Karen, and let me thank you, and through you also the Dutch Ministry, for having invited me to be present here at a session, at the lecture, which is called After the Late Baroness Henriette van Lynden. Of course, I vividly remember Henriette, also during my time in the Dutch Ministry. I am the third speaker already for you, so I will promise and try not to make it too long, because of course we are all also looking forward to a debate with you afterwards. I also, and you said it again at the beginning, you want us to be forward-looking and maybe to come with some food for thought. And that is certainly also what I will try to do. Yeah. But of course, and it has already become clear from the two previous speakers, we are meeting in a year, well, you could call it a year of sad anniversaries. 50 years of occupation, 70 years after a two-state solution was proposed by the United Nations in the first place, in Resolution 181. So we are looking at the situation of these anniversaries of this year and of a long and so far elusive quest for peace. So the situation is looking dire. I think we have to face that. And in fact, I remember that already in, I think, in one of my briefings to the Security Council in 2011, I started to warn that instead of moving towards two states for two people, also in my view the only possible solution, we were actually moving in the other direction, which I could only term as a one-state reality. Now, what can be done? I did indeed recently publish a book. It was my reckoning of 7 years of failure, basically, in my function for the UN in trying actually to help the parties to bring peace. I very much appreciate what you said, Ari, about that. I think it is all our collective failure that we haven't been able to reach peace, and I think the international community is part of that failure. Too often, in my view, the international community has been cheering the parties onwards towards the next round of negotiations, not realizing that these negotiations were usually based on false expectations. I'm afraid that is what we have seen during the past 20 years since we had an opportunity to talk about peace after the Palestinians took their important decisions about a two-state solution and accepting a two-state solution, accepting also Israel. these were very important moments, but we have now to realize that that was 20 years ago, and I can only describe the present situation as uncertain, volatile, and also, yes, dangerous. I don't want to go too much into the present situation, but just to mention, of course, we are meeting at the very day that Netanyahu is for the first time meeting with President Trump. And again, we have to wait and give him the benefit of our doubts, if you have doubts about what his policy is going to be, but we simply don't know. Is he going to move the embassy to Jerusalem? Is that such a good idea? I personally doubt it. What does he mean with wanting to become the president to make the ultimate deal? Again, I think we all in this room would be very happy if he would be able to do so. But can he? And what kind of a deal? We don't know these things. We have had a very rough recent period also, if you think about the UN settlement resolution in December, which was, and here I have to speak also, maybe also a little bit in my previous capacity, which was in the resolution only reaffirming what the international community has been saying for such a long time about settlements. But as you know, the answer was even more settlements and a lot of fury in Washington, also in the Congress in Washington, also about the very United Nations. I'm very afraid that the United Nations actually is now could become collateral damage of this conflict. I was, in my book also, I have been warning, I've been saying that if the United Nations, on whose shoulders this problem was put 70 years ago now, when the Brits gave up and gave it to the United Nations, the very fact that it is still unresolved is also having consequences for the United Nations. And let me also, I cannot but also recall what just recently happened to Prime Minister Salam Fayyad. I think there was a very imaginative idea of the new Secretary General to propose him to become his envoy for the very difficult Libya peace process in Libya. And actually, the Secretary General was planning also to nominate for the first time an Israeli, Tzipi Livni, in a comparable high position within the UN. And I think he did all that also because he wanted to show as a Secretary General that the UN wants to be part of a solution rather than to be part of a problem. And now, well, we all know what happened. It is now not so likely anymore because of an American veto that actually Fayyad can actually go to Libya, where he would have been the right man for the job. I'm just mentioning it because it's important to understand in what kind of a situation we find ourselves. We've seen the Kerry parameters. I can only say too little, too late. I was there when Kerry tried actually to propose to the parties parameters, just sound ideas, fair and sound ideas about the key issues the parties need to resolve if you want a two-state solution. But then in 2014 that failed, and the Americans didn't see it through. They could have done it, it didn't happen, and now I'm afraid with the reaction of the new Trump administration, we can forget about parameters for a long time to come. In my book, I have been saying that this is one of the things you need to do. Create a fair, level playing field for these parties to help them to resolve the so-called final status issues. So it is too early to tell, as I said, what could happen, but as the other speakers also have been already mentioning, there's a lot of talk about perhaps a new approach, what is sometimes then called the outside-in approach, which would be indeed a way to build on the Arab Peace Initiative, of which Khaled has actually rightly reminded us that that is a proposal already before us since 2002 and has never been acted on. I think that it is very important to think about how we, in this very difficult situation, can step by step set up a new process. I don't believe that an early renewal of negotiations is likely, and even that we could then also expect a different result. Let me remind you of what Einstein has been saying about repeating the same experiment, I mean these negotiations, time and again. What is the result? He called that an example of madness. So let me then try to look a bit forward. You have been asking us to be a little bit imaginative. Should we wait just for another US initiative to come? What about Europe, indeed, as has already been suggested? What actually could be done in present circumstances? And if you want to try to envisage a process, I think you have to answer a core question which still hasn't been resolved, which is how to address, in present circumstances, Israel's legitimate security needs and achieving an end of occupation, achieving that end of occupation also by honoring Palestinian self-determination, by honoring Palestinian statehood. And what you have said, Ari, still rings in my mind. You have been proudly defending Israel's right to self-determination, but you said, so do the Palestinians. So this is very important. But we have to square here Israel's legitimate security needs with that other objective, which still has been unfulfilled for 70 years. We're living now in the 70th year after Resolution 181, where this was proposed in the first place. Now, how could this be done? And here I would like to actually build then also on what you could call a new outside-in approach. What if we could indeed set up a regional security platform? Call it a platform or a conference, doesn't matter for me too much. Based on one very important principle, which is end of belligerency between Israel, but then you should also think about what you could do on the Palestinian side. So is it possible to imagine the following? Let's end regional belligerence with Israel and recognize Palestine. Let me again a little bit elaborate on this, what I mean with this. I already talked about having a regional security conference. The time is may indeed be ripe for this. What we need is at least a critical mass of Arab states willing to do it this time, to go one step beyond the Arab Peace Initiative by actually sitting together with Israel on the basis of a commitment to non-belligerence. This is not normalization yet, no recognition of Israel I'm suggesting here, but end of belligerency. If that could be done, with countries, of course, Egypt and Jordan have already done that. They have their peace treaties. But if countries like Saudi Arabia, some of the Gulf states, including Qatar, and of course the Emirates, but I think Qatar is important too. Morocco can play an important role. I think Turkey, as an important Islamic state, should also be involved in such a regional security table. And maybe even we could include a wider circle of states, Indonesia, the largest Muslim state in the world. If we could do this based on non-belligerency, it means that those states have agreed that they will settle their disputes, their own bilateral disputes, henceforth only by peaceful means. It means, of course, also that you create a platform against global terror. You can also discuss and do what has been tried before, after the Madrid process, to address also the very urgent regional issues like water, energy, Israel becoming also an energy exporter now. And, of course, this should be then also the platform to support and facilitate, in particular, direct Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations. Now I come to the second part of what I said. Let's end belligerency and recognize Palestine. We should complete the process in stages of international recognition of Palestinian statehood. Here, we are in a situation that we already have a big majority of UN states which have recognized have recognized Palestine. But there is a critical mass there still lacking, and that is in particular Europe. It includes Holland and other countries. Now, what I would propose is that if you can set up such a regional platform, we have to look also at a process where this recognition of Palestine, something we have promised the Palestinians 70 years ago, would also become also more tangible on the Palestinian side. A bit in your vein, I think, Ari, what we would be doing is we would be creating not a two-state solution yet, that will take much longer, but a two-state reality. If indeed such countries would also say, no, it is so important that we don't give up the perspective of a two-state solution, that we actually, in this context, are willing to recognize Palestine. Now, there is also an important thing about the Palestinians. Of course, settlements are also for me the main driver away from a two-state solution. I have said this always to my Israeli friends. How can you convince anybody that you mean it, another state, two states, if you continue to build on the territory of that other state? It simply doesn't make any sense, any logic. But I'm saying also to the Palestinians that a second driver away from a two-state solution is what's happening in Gaza. It's your own division. I used to talk about the West Bank and Gaza drifting apart like rudderless ships on the high sea. You even talk about secession now, Ahmed. So we have to find a way also that if we start to recognize a Palestinian state, something needs to be done about that Palestinian division as well. And here my proposal would be that, yes, Palestinian elections will need to be organized. I don't see any other way to come to Palestinian unity. It has been tried through the PLO for so many times. I've lost count of the conferences in Cairo or Doha where new efforts were made actually to come to reconciliation. I think the only way is to let the Palestinians themselves speak. After 10 years, after all, 10 years of no elections. 10 years have actually passed, have gone. And here, the link with the conference. In my view, the only thing we should request from a Palestinian political party wishing to participate in future negotiations is, again, non-belligerency, non-violence. That's the only thing that counts. You cannot expect from Hamas to, even before a peace agreement, to agree to accept and recognize Israel. That's not going to happen in this world. It's never going to happen. But what we should be able to request from any party as part of a bigger regional conference on security is non-belligerency, non-violence. Now again, it could very well be that Hamas still doesn't buy this and would try to block it. Well, first of all, I think again that we should be imaginative and think about other ways then how to make sure that Gazans have some participation in future elections for a Palestinian government. That is, I think, something we could do. You know, if you have in particular also countries like Qatar and Turkey supporting this process, I think it's not completely to be ruled out. But let me also warn you, the present development in Gaza is going absolutely the wrong direction again. I've been in 3 wars in Gaza, a 4th maybe around the corner. We also see that Hamas is further radicalizing. They've just chosen a new leader, which is not so much an Islamist, but more a jihadist, as I understand. So time is not on our side, I also tell you. And if we do this, something what I have been proposing, of course we need a massive reconstruction program for Gaza as well. And then finally, Israel should then also open the gates, the crossings, for this to happen. I have been involved for all my 7 years in efforts actually to do right that. And I left very frustrated. So if we do this, then what we have built up is actually that after Palestinian elections, Maybe you already think that I'm talking about science fiction, but still, I want us to have a kind of a perspective. If we would actually have successful Palestinian elections, then you would have a Palestinian government which should be invited to that regional table, and in the context and in the framework of that regional table, renew negotiations with Israel. If you do that, you also transform the conflict from a conflict between Israel and the PLO, rather to Israel and a Palestinian government representing a state. That is also a difference. I think it is important because how much I understand that how important the PLO is, it is becoming ineffective in terms of representing Palestinian interests. This is up for the Palestinians to decide, but I would see it as a big pro for them if they are actually invited as a state to future negotiations rather than as a liberation movement, a rather archaic movement by the time, and so divided as they are also in that framework. Now again, I don't know, Ari, what you would think about all this in terms also of Israel. But I'm saying this, that actually, what is in it for Israel? It is this regional table. It is the recognition of Israel by all those states, end of belligerency, no full normalization yet. Israel doesn't need to ask, to recognize, in my view, the Palestinian state. That could wait. Maybe even the US could wait. But we need critical mass there. And here I'm looking to Europe, Holland included. Now, I think I've been long enough in trying to come up with some food for thought. I have just one final warning also, and piece of advice to both of you. To all my Israeli and Palestinian friends, still believing in 2 states for 2 people, in a 2-state solution. I'm afraid you will also have to reimagine what it means in today's circumstances. I personally do not believe any longer, and even sometimes wonder whether it is even desirable, to have the so-called classical 2-state solution based on total maximum separation. It's not even total separation, because you have a very important Palestinian Arab minority inside Israel. But maybe what you will have to imagine is that, apart from that, the future Palestinian state may also have a Jewish Israeli minority. It is about that also my book, which, if you are interested in, is also available after this meeting. I have been, let me make some, I have been thinking about in one of the chapters in the book. It is only a suggestion, it is not actionable immediately, but I have to tell you that in terms of 2-state solutions, whether they are dead or not, that one, the old one, I'm afraid is dead. And that's why it will take time. And that's why we need a process to actually reconfigure a road to a 2-state outcome. And I am heartened that both of you have said it loud and clear, that it is the only way and no alternative. I've been banging my head while writing that book also, whether I should declare the 2-state solution dead, and I thought I would be doing you a big disservice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert Serry, and thanks for being imaginative, as we had indeed asked the speakers to do. And thanks to all 3 of you for your thoughtful and incisive examination of where we currently stand and where we may be headed in the foreseeable future. I think you've provided, all 3 of you have provided us with rich and thought-provoking insights and ideas. And in a little while, I would like to open up the floor for questions from the audience. But let me first ask for a brief response by Ahmed Khaledi and Ari Shavit to the ideas as outlined by Robert Serry for setting up a regional security platform based on the principle of the end of belligerency with Israel and recognition of Palestine in a gradual process, leading to what Robert called a two-state reality. And that is building on, if I understand you correctly, to some extent, the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002. And so it's a form of the outside-in solution that we hear a lot about these days. So I was wondering, Ahmed, would you be willing to respond briefly to this idea?
Yes, thank you. I think it's a creative and intriguing idea. I'm not sure it corresponds to what the parties who are proposing it today actually mean when they talk about a regional solution. Clearly, what the Americans and this Israeli government mean when they talk about a regional approach, they're talking about an alliance against Iran. And that's something quite different from what Ambassador Serry is proposing. And the assumption is that because there is a so-called Sunni bloc that fears or is concerned more about Iran than Israel, that you can now create a new regional architecture that is based on a common enemy and that will overcome the whatever prejudices and problems there were in the past and redirect, for the moment at least, all energies away from the Palestine issue. My understanding of what Netanyahu will be telling or may have already told Trump is something along the following lines. The Palestine problem is not that important. It's not really what the region is concerned about. The regional leaders are much more worried about Iran. We have now a moment where we can bring everybody together. And then maybe at some future stage, once we have formed this alliance, we can then start thinking anew about how the Arabs can pressure the Palestinians into accepting something that they're not willing to accept today. So it's really very far from Ambassador Serry's approach. I'm not saying he is wrong. I'm just saying that I don't think this is where the so-called outside-in is now being debated amongst those who are proposing it. There are a whole series of problems, I think, related to this. I'll try and make it short. The first is, if you're going to make an alliance against Iran, you have to think, so what does this actually mean? Does this mean you're going to have Israeli troops on the border of Jordan sort of trying to fend off the popular the PMU units from Iraq? Are the Israeli forces going to go to Yemen to fight in the war against the Houthis on behalf of the Saudis? So what exactly does this regional thing mean in practical terms? And I'm a bit dubious about what it actually translates into. The second question has to do with the fact that you're assuming that there is a bloc that's coherent and that all sees things in the same way. And the fact is that it doesn't. Egypt does not see the so-called Iranian threat in the same way that Saudi Arabia does. Many of the Gulf countries, Oman and Kuwait, do not share the same position as the UAE and Qatar. Qatar and Saudi Arabia are together in Syria in a manner that the UAE isn't. The UAE has relations with Egypt in a way that Qatar doesn't. So this so-called Sunni bloc is much more complicated, much more varied than people make out. It really, I think it's misleading to try and lump them all together and to suggest that you can put them all together on one front against Iran. Number three, there's a domestic audience within all of these countries. And the domestic audience, I'm not even sure it's willing to go for non-belligerence. The regimes may feel that they're able to coordinate in terms of security information, in terms of sharing intelligence, and even in terms of buying Israeli hardware, which apparently is happening in the Gulf. But it's one thing to do that covertly, and it's another thing altogether to embark on an overt alliance with Israel, because we're talking about Gulf countries that have a very, very fundamentalist residue, that have preachers who speak in violent terms, not to say anti-Semitic terms. And the idea that you're suddenly going to go from that to an alliance, an active alliance with Israel, I think is stretching it. So the whole regional thing, I think, is still very half-baked, ill-considered, and in my opinion, at this stage, unworkable. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
Well, thank you very much. It was very comprehensive. Perhaps I could also ask you, Ari, to respond. You've already expressed a few words of caution about the regional approach in your presentation, but I was wondering maybe if you could respond to some of the specifics mentioned by Robert Serry in his proposal.
So I'm always cautious, but here I want to be actually a bit enthusiastic as well, not only cautious. So first of all, I appreciate so much the conversation we have today, because I think that first of all we see that actually we agree on quite a lot, and I was so moved to hear your speech, Ahmed. I think that actually we were, rather than be in confrontation, we totally agree. When you get to details, we might, but basically we share exactly the same, and so I think the conversation we have here is probably much more constructive than the one held in the Oval Office as we speak. But referring to I have some caution. I'll get to it, but I'm really enthusiastic about your approach, and let me say, not only me personally. In this sense, I'll allow myself to speak, I think, for a wider Israeli public. Look, we all have to understand that we won't be able to move forward if we don't speak to the still reasonable, potential Israeli silent majority. I know Israel looks so horrible these days, and believe me, it's more horrible for me every morning than probably for you, to see the news, to see the new laws, legislation, my government. Let me assure you, Israelis are not as bad as their government and not as bad as their Knesset. There is still a pragmatic sentiment in Israel of people who want to live, who want to move forward. We have the major political problem. The Palestinians have some problems of their own. Our main problem is that we have a small minority of extremists. It's not that small, but it's a minority. But it's motivated, well-organized, and politically sophisticated. And this is why, in many ways, it took the country over. But the real reality is that if we work properly, there is the ability. The moderates are just not galvanized. They don't have the ideas. They don't have the language. They don't have the organization. If we bring different kind of ideas, I'm sure we can bring change in Israel. And part of the frustration in Israel, I mentioned it before, and I want just to give you a picture of what's happened in Israel. In 2001, Ariel Sharon, the warmonger, ran on a platform of peace. In 2015, the left-wing Meretz party did not mention the word peace. And probably the same applies with the Palestinians. After all these failures, after all these attempts, all this high talk detached from reality, people are totally burned. And then you cannot mobilize them to support anything. So part of Europe's role and the role of the international community is to bring new language. If you just speak about concepts that were tried and failed, and you talk about some sort of Scandinavian peace when you have Syria next door, no one takes you seriously. So your language, Robert, is so refreshing. Before we get into the details, this kind of pragmatic, realistic approach is, I would immediately appoint you back, to be the international community's envoy to deal with it. Now, where am I more favorable to your regional approach, with all my caution, than Ahmed? Look, I think we're talking now about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. But we are ignoring the fact that the Middle East altogether is totally out of control. The reason I care so much about the Israeli-Palestinian issue, because it's the future of my children and my neighbors. Occupation is unfair to Ahmed. It's endangering the lives of my children. So I'm very passionate about it. But the whole region is dysfunctional. I've heard you have elections here in a month's time. Your elections are about the Middle East. The failure of the West and the failure to deal with the Middle East in a realistic, creative manner changes your system. Europe is in danger. If Paris and Berlin don't deal in a reasonable way with Damascus and Tripoli, you get Damascus and Tripoli and Berlin and Paris. This is where we live. So I'm more enthusiastic about your idea than perhaps you are, because it's not only fighting Iran. We need to think in a much more ambitious way about the entire Middle East. We need this structure, the security structure, not only to fight. The motivation is on the Arab part. Now the change, they're fighting Iran and ISIS and radicalism. This is why they are closer to Israel. And if I'll tell you some of the stories of how close it is, you just won't believe it. It's unbelievable how close so many Arab countries are now to Israel. It's mind-boggling. You talk about arrangements. There is actually a strategic alliance in many ways, in the most intimate way. But Ahmed is totally right that this is all under the table. But I think that looking for an idea that is less than the full peace, but more than just arrangements and intelligence and some business, that's the way to go. And I think we need it to support the process between Israelis and Palestinians, but we need it in order to begin to address together the general problems of the region. So I have an offer to Europe. I can get into details, but I'll totally support your plan. But what I ask you in return, that should it fail in the sense that you cannot get formal commitment to the non-belligerence and the recursion, let's work on a de facto. I'll give you an example. In 1970, a de facto peace agreement was actually reached between Jordan and Israel. No ceremonies, nobody knew about it, no embassies, nothing. But Israel and Jordan almost overnight moved from being enemies to being strategic partners, militarily, intelligence, development. And that informal de facto peace lasted for 24 years, and most of the time it was more intimate than it is when we have a formal peace. So I would totally support your approach, but if we cannot do the formal stuff, let's think of creative ways of creating these structures in ways that are a bit more suitable to the climate right now. If the leaders cannot do the formal thing, let's create that de facto peace, but guided by your vision.
If I may, a quick question to you, Ari. You do
realize... Very briefly, if
you do realize, of course, that this is also meaning Israeli acceptance of the Palestinian state, that state recognition, because that is something which, of course, in terms of the present way Israel is thinking. I'm just saying this to make it very crystal clear that there is, of course, a quid pro quo between these things.
And it needs to work together on a revolution in Palestine. I want every young Palestinian to feel that life has dramatically changed within a short time. And Israel has to be the first one contributing it, but to that, I think we can get some Arab contribution as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for both of your responses. And I would now like to open the floor for questions from the audience. I see many hands raised already. I would like to appeal to you to really focus on the topic of tonight's discussion. Please indeed raise your hand if you want to pose a question. And if you get the microphone, then introduce yourself briefly and ask one question at a time. And try to keep in mind that the question ends with the question mark. So I see the lady here.
It's always wonderful to think out of the box and to keep coming out with options that are necessary. And I think such visions, they need to wait for the right timing. Right now, 2 days ago, I met the Israeli who was behind the strategy of unilateral Israeli unilateral withdrawal from Gaza, which proved to be a failure. And this is the vision that is coming, and it's proposed to Netanyahu. Another unilateral withdrawal from the West Bank, but this time is to keep the Israeli military together with Jordanian military, also Egyptian, given what's happening, two alliances, and the only Gulf state that is to be involved is Saudi Arabia.
And please, could you come to the question?
Yeah, so this is the question. This is what is proposed to Netanyahu. What will be the effect, on the ground, whether on the Palestinian side, on the international community, and, in the Israeli? Is it successful? Do you think this will be implemented as what happened in Gaza? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a couple of questions, and before we give the speakers a chance to answer, please, the gentleman here in the, no, I was thinking here in the third. Can you get there with the mic? Yes.
Okay, my name is Van Dam, former with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, first, Robert, Serry, I read your book, and there are many things in it, and I advise all those to read it. There was one thing which struck me, that you never came across any serious plan about the one state, which I call solution. Okay. And that's very strange, because we're all the time talking about one state, two state, but nobody really studied what is it one state. So Mr. Ahmed Khaledi, he described actually what a one state is. This means civil war, sectarian war, and so on, which is, between quotation mark, the ideal situation for Israel, to expel more Palestinians. So we have to go to a one-state solution. We have seen that Israel is not sensitive towards any nice statements. We have made ourselves ridiculous by asking for 40 years, yes? You should stop the settlements at 100,000. You should stop at 200, and so on. So they're not doing anything. They will just do as they want to do themselves. So what do you think is the real means of pressure on Israel to really do something? You can have these regional conferences, very nice. You can have recognition by the Arab states. You mentioned the anti-Saudi plan of 2001. There was already a plan in 1981 of King Fahd. So they're just cashing in everything they can get. But so my question has already been. My question is, what means do you think Israel can act, not just listen, but act? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll take one more question. Let me see. Can I ask to bring the mic to the gentleman over there in the blue sweater?
My name is Paul Aerts. Yes, I'm...
Yeah, you have to speak a little closer to the mic.
Okay, my name is Paul Aerts. Very brief question. It seems that there is a consensus of the danger coming from Iran. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Thank you for being so concise. Thank you very much. Well, now I think we'll take these three questions, and I'll repeat them very briefly. Unilateral withdrawal from the West Bank. How do people feel about that? What is the real means of pressure on Israel? And could you elaborate on what kind of danger would be coming from Iran? Robert, could I first give you the floor?
Yes, well, if you want to start with me. First, I already sense from some sides, Palestinian side, a certain concern about what I have been proposing, and I understand it. On the Palestinian side, of course, there are risks in what you have been saying. What is the real idea behind maybe a regional approach, and a coalition against Iran? Well, you were very right in saying that this is, of course, not what I have in mind with my plan. Make it very clear. I had wanted to come forward with a regional approach, which probably will not include Iran, because I don't think Iran is one of the countries which is very quickly willing to actually end belligerency. But still, it is really a new approach to try to create a new process, level playing field for the reasons which I have mentioned, and Ari has been elaborating also already on it. But let me also say to you, I understand Palestinian concerns. If I would be Palestinian, I would be also concerned that this is only for Israel to jump to the second circle. You have been talking about 3 circles in your book, Ari. This is, of course, always a possibility, and we should be aware of it. So that's what I would like to say to that. On pressure on Israel, of course, we have had these discussions also before. I do believe that maybe the time has come for us to make it very clear to Israel that if Israel persists with policies which are actually completely going against a 2-state outcome, that maybe we have to come to draw our conclusions then also that Israel apparently doesn't want a 2-state outcome and that it is then a 1-state reality, an apartheid system, and that completely changes the game. I think this is exactly why many Israelis are worried about that may happen, actually. On Iran, maybe for others to answer, I have already been talking about I wanted to focus on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and maybe others want to actually reflect a bit on the danger coming from Iran.
Thank you. Ahmed, could I ask you to reflect on a number of those questions?
Sure. I think the question of unilateral withdrawal always comes up when all other avenues seem to be blocked. I'm very dubious that the Israelis, or this Israeli government, is going to consider that. Not this Israeli government. Partly because, according to their view, unilateral withdrawals have ended in disaster, whether it was from Lebanon or from Gaza. And I think it's a very hard sell for any prime minister in Israel to tell his public that we're going to unilaterally withdraw, even if you're going to bring in friendly Arab forces into the West Bank. Now, the second half, that is, of bringing friendly Arab forces, in itself, I think, is deeply, deeply problematic. Firstly, because I'm not sure anyone at this stage, whether Jordanian or Egyptian or Saudi, or in any foreseeable future, is going to take on responsibility. Think of what it means. It means that those forces who are there will have to take over functions that are performed by the IDF. So will the Jordanians and the Saudis and the Egyptians be willing to go after so-called resistance in the West Bank? And will they do that in such a manner that will satisfy the Israelis? I think that one has to be very hesitant. I'm not saying it's impossible. And I think part of the regional approach, which, by the way, I repeat, my hesitation was not about what Ambassador Serry was saying. My hesitation was about what is now the prevailing notion of the regional approach. His regional approach is different, and I think it does have merit, and I agree with Ari that it does have merit, and one needs to think about it. And potentially, if you have a regional architecture which includes the Arabs and the Israelis, you may be able to think of certain trade-offs, perhaps such as a stronger Jordanian role on the West Bank, as opposed to what it is today. But that's sometime in the future, and it also depends on what context. Is it one in which we have a 2-state solution as an end game? Is it one where we are still in a situation of uncertainty as to where we're going? Are the Israelis going to give the Arabs more than they're willing to give the Palestinians? Is this or any foreseeable Israeli government going to accept to a Palestinian state on the 67 lines with swaps in such a way that's acceptable to the Palestinians and the Arabs? These are big, big question marks, and one should not ignore them. It's still a reasonable and I think new approach, and it hasn't been exhausted. And for all that we've done in the past and banged our heads against the wall, this is a new opening that needs to be thought about. And maybe we have the very small building block here, but it's still a very small building block. On means of pressure, yes, I agree entirely. I think the Europeans have to think very hard about what kind of pressure they can bring to bear against Israel on precisely the issue of settlements, and to put a stop to the notion of annexation, and to keep the line, as I said earlier, on the two-state option. And there are everything from technical exchanges to banning settlement products to all sorts of mechanisms and means that the Europeans have been very reluctant to do for all sorts of reasons, mostly historical, but I think the time has come for a change here. And maybe spurred by the retreats and the confusion in Washington, the Europeans are going to step up because, as Ari said, this is not a Middle East problem anymore. It's a problem that's here, it affects all of us. And if we don't deal with it, it's going to get worse. So there is an interest here. It's not out of love for anything, it's out of self-interest. And this is why the Europeans need to act in a different way than before. And finally on Iran, and I'll be very brief, I don't think there is a consensus on Iran, by the way. I think various Arab parties see Iran in a different way. The Israelis see it as an extreme threat, the Saudis see it as an extreme threat, but other Arab parties don't. Iraq doesn't, Syria obviously doesn't, Lebanon doesn't, Algeria doesn't, Morocco doesn't to some extent, even Oman doesn't. So, you know, there is no, and that's, I think, part of the reason why the so-called regional approach based on hostility towards Iran is fatuous. It doesn't exist.
Thank you. Thank you, Ahmed, for answering all three questions. And I would also like to give Ari an opportunity to offer his reflections.
So first of all, I want to offer a term perhaps that will solve the part of the fear or the anxiety here. You know, in the old days, we used to talk about a Jordanian-Palestinian option. Let's talk about a regional Palestinian option, because then it's very clear that I think none of us think in any way. But obviously, some in the Israeli right want to use the regional, there is a deep agenda there. There is actually no Palestinian people, we can ignore it, and then we'll talk about the region, we won't do anything. But that's, you know, the extreme Israeli right, we have to make it clear that's not the idea. But I think that on the other hand, without bringing the region in that reasonable way, not in the utopian way, but making it, I think, a regional Palestinian approach. And I think I'll give soon an example of how I think it works when I'll refer to the unilateral question. Regarding the pressure on Israel, allow me on this issue not to give a full answer because I'm a citizen of a democracy. I think that for me as an Israeli, to ask you to put pressure on my government contrary to the will of the people of Israel is undemocratic. So I leave this to you, whatever you decide. I will not be one of those Israelis who ask the world to save us. We have to do our political work. And what I would ask you is to cooperate with the moderate forces in Israel. And therefore, whatever you think about pressure, I will add two things. One, if you put pressure, you have to look at all the parties. You cannot just single out one. You have to think, although there is no symmetry, and I totally am aware of it. But if you want progress, you have to work, if you are in an assertive approach, you have to be assertive with everybody. But the other thing which is more important, you must give some hope and concern. Israelis are very difficult to figure out psychologically, okay? On the one hand, we tend to be very tough and rough and all that. On the other hand, when Anwar Sadat arrived and hugged us, we just melted. When King Hussein came and hugged us, he would have won the Israeli elections. So you're talking about sticks, carrots, emotion, not only emotional. If the language coming from Europe and the international community will, we understand that you live in a rough neighborhood, we understand that you have to take terrible risks that are dangerous, but we'll walk hand in hand with you if you do the right thing. It's like the Maastricht demands in 1992. You want to join the civilized free world, you have to do ABC, but we'll be there with you to help you through the process. I think that sort of approach, first of all, I think is much more fair. I think it's also much more effective. Now I want to deal with the issue of unilateralism, which I think is a very important one. First of all, let me say that I think that there will have to be unilateral components in this new process, but it can't be a simplistic unilateralist complex, okay? You won't have, in order to move forward in this, there will be elements of coordinated unilateralism of some. We cannot, by the way, as an Israeli, I don't think it was a total failure. I'm much happier that we are not controlling Gaza. I'm much happier that we don't have these settlements there. And by the way, the Israeli right keeps attacking this disengagement, but no one asks us to rebuild those settlements in Gaza or to go back there. So it wasn't such a failure. And yet there was enough failure there to learn from it. We have to do it differently. We cannot ignore the Palestinians. We cannot ignore just get out and throw the keys. And so it had to be something much more complex, much more sophisticated, with much more human understanding, much more economic thinking, and that really tries to build a process that is in dialogue, but as I said, not necessarily with signed agreements. I think there is a lot you can achieve in the Middle East in understandings and mutual interest processes. Sometimes it's more difficult to solve the theological issues, so to speak, of the conflict. But people want to live and they want to move forward, so we can work on that sentiment. But if I combine it all, I think we have to begin with fixing what went wrong with the disengagement in Gaza. I think that if we make Gaza an example of a prosperous part of Palestine, the psychology in my country will totally change, and I think that a lot of the psychology in Palestine will change. We already did it, but we didn't do it right. And this is where I think we can combine everything we talked about. Look, Gaza, leave aside the process. I'm an Israeli, but I care about my Palestinian neighbors. They don't have electricity. The water is not worth drinking. And in a few years' time, it might be a real full-blown human catastrophe. It's already in the making. So I'll give you one small example. The people of Gaza don't have drinking water. Israel has the best water technology in the world. I know that in Holland, water is a problem. With us, it's the other way around. If you actually bring the Saudis, not to bring their forces or sign agreements, but to finance the Israeli technology that will create a major desal plant in Gaza, you can solve the water issue in no time. If Israel will show generosity for once, we now have natural gas. If we'll supply Gaza with all the gas they need for their electricity, I would do it for free, but if not for free, for cost, for nothing, next to nothing. In no time, you'll have a revolution without signing agreements. So I would try to bring, this is in my mind, examples of how the regional dimension can work in order to help. You can revolutionize the way the West Bank is and the way Gaza is without, ending the conflict. So I think that really a kind of Gaza first approach. Again, I want the West Bank at the same time. But we did something there. Part of it was right. Obviously, a lot of it was wrong. Let's fix Gaza, deal with the Gaza to prevent a human catastrophe and to prove that we can all work together on a practical solution that gives Palestinians life and gives Israelis some sense of security.
Thank you. Thanks. We are running a little bit late, but I would like to give the audience the opportunity to ask one more round of questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. And I see a number of hands raised. The gentleman over here at the corner, could you bring him the mic? He's right before you. No, he's in front of you. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Arjan Breukel. I write with Vice Versa magazine. My question is to either one of you. Did Mr. Trump just give Mr. Netanyahu a beautiful bargaining chip at the inevitable next rounds of negotiations? Thank you.
Yeah.
Could
you elaborate a little bit on your question? It's good that it was very short. Did you?
I didn't hear. I didn't hear.
Huh? No?
I didn't understand. I just didn't.
Excuse me?
We didn't understand.
You didn't understand his question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I asked him to elaborate on the question so we could understand it better. So maybe it's good that it's short, but maybe you should make it a little bit longer.
It was too short, I understand.
Yeah.
At the next round of negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis, would the renouncing of the two-state solution not provide Netanyahu with a bargaining chip during the negotiations. Is that okay?
Did you? Okay. Bargaining chip.
I understand.
Did you? Yes. Right. Good. Some more questions? Yes. Please. I see a lady over there. Can you get there? Yeah. You'll get the mic. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the illuminating contributions, and especially I would like to thank
Could you briefly introduce yourself, perhaps?
My name is Els van Dichelen, historian, journalist, and I've been in the area for quite a long time.
Good, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Serry, especially for your pragmatic and very realistic view that I missed actually this evening. And my question is, how big do you estimate the chance that there will be elections at the Palestinian side?
Thank you. Thank you. We'll take one more question, and I think I'll go all the way to the left over here, if there is anyone with a mic. Yes, the gentleman over there.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Ilyas Sharali. First of all, thank you very much for the talk today. As a student, my question will stem from a more student perspective. As students, of course, we aspire to either, become successful businessmen or politicians or diplomats, you name it. But once we are in those positions, you're obviously constrained by the company or country you represent. So my question is, what can we do now as students, the younger generation, when it comes down to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? What is our role of the younger generation students, and what advice would you give us to maybe be a little part of this aiding?
Thank you, and thank you very much. Maybe we could start with this question. What can the younger generation do? Maybe not only just here, but also in Israel or the Palestinian territories. And then we also have the question, how big are the chances of Palestinian elections? And what happened to Netanyahu during the discussions between Netanyahu and President Trump? Would there be a bargaining chip somewhere in there? Perhaps, Ahmed, could you reflect first on some of these questions?
Sure. I think the last question is a very important one. And I'm not sure I'm wise enough or even old enough to be able to give you a good answer. I do think that the first thing you need to do is to really try and understand and empathize. Of course, I'm a Palestinian. I'm very proud and committed to my cause. I believe my cause is just, and I'm sure Ari thinks exactly the same of his cause. So I have no hesitation in defending my cause or in being ready to fight for it. But I also understand that the other side has its own views and narratives, and that it's genuine. I don't believe that one side is disingenuous or is trying to pretend, or that their fears are unfounded, and I don't believe it's my job to question the integrity of the other side's beliefs. And I think for anyone who's interested in this conflict, you have to start with that. You have to start, not necessarily that both sides are right or even both sides are wrong, but that both sides have genuine fears, concerns. And if you can empathize and understand that, then that's the first step towards deciding where you want to take this. And then you can decide. But that's where you go first. On the two states bargaining chip, you know, I wonder, and I'm really not being funny here. I really don't know whether President Trump knows what he's talking about, honestly. I mean, I really don't know when he says 2 states, 1 state, 5 states. Does he really understand what it means to give up one or to opt for the other? My sense is he really doesn't. He doesn't. He doesn't understand the conflict. He doesn't understand what it means if you stay 1 state. Has he given Bibi a bargaining chip? And by the way, I think very soon it'll be clear that the Americans are going to say, no, we haven't given up on the 2-state solution. We only said that maybe it's not the only way. And you know what? Maybe it isn't the only way. But I don't think there'll be a formal American withdrawal from a two-state solution. I'd be very, very surprised. Nonetheless, I think that the notion today is that the Prime Minister of Israel has more leeway, has greater freedom of action, less fear of American condemnation, and therefore may feel himself more able to maneuver around whatever it is he wants to do on the West Bank and in Gaza. He was constrained for fear of what the Obama administration might do. They might not, after all, they let a Security Council resolution pass that he was very much against. They did an Iran deal that he was very much against. Today, I don't think you're going to see that from this administration. They're not going to allow an anti-Israeli resolution to pass in the Security Council. Not very soon. Maybe in a year or two when they really understand what's happening, they may change their minds. But for the short term, I think he has gained leeway. On the elections, the problem with elections is that, in the Palestinian elections, is that in order to have elections, the parties have to be ready to concede power. Now, very frankly, I don't see Hamas ready to give up power in Gaza or Fatah ready to give up power in the West Bank. So we can call for elections, we can hope for elections, we can demand elections. But the political reality is that neither of the two main parties on the ground is ready to concede to the other. So whatever elections you're going to have, in my opinion, will be false. They will not be genuine. They'll be manufactured in order to correspond to this very sad reality that we're facing.
Thank you. Ari, would you like to share your thoughts on some of those questions?
Yes, I'll share my thought because I think Ahmed answered all the questions wonderfully. So I'll refer to the student question, but in general, what I would love us all to go out from here, and definitely young people, from what I found to be an inspiring discussion. And that is the sense of urgency. We have no time. Robert has been doing his sacred work for such a long time. Ahmed has been trying it for decades. Even Ahmed and I were talking about this, some creative ideas, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. And so much time has been wasted. There was political impotence. There was intellectual laziness. We actually understood the problem definitely after 2000. It's 15 years almost that we should have done much better. We should have gone for much better ideas. One small example, I won't elaborate, but the Palestinian I admire more than anyone is Salam Fayyad. He's the one Palestinian leader who really moved forward, tried to give hope for young Palestinians, do the constructive thing. He's alive and kicking, but he did such amazing work. And we wasted that opportunity of these golden years that there was some hope emerging in the West Bank, and we didn't build a political process that were tailor-made for him, and we missed that opportunity. So I think that now, and I'll speak personally as we finish this as an Israeli, I think that we are risking our very existence. My country right now is advancing a suicidal process. We are so strong militarily, so strong economically, but we are abusing this strength by advancing this process that is killing us from within, morally and politically. So we have to understand that there isn't another decade to waste. We must bring the creative ideas, and I think we had quite a number of them. But as I said, I'm open to all creative ideas. We must bring the new ideas. We must create this new kind of language, and we must act quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert, you have the last word tonight.
Yes, well, I think...
Excuse me. Yeah, excuse me. I would like to give him the floor right now.
Yeah.
So you have the floor.
Well, first of all, I think that the questions have already been answered, but let me just give a little bit still my perspective on some of these questions. First of all, on the Palestinian elections, I agree with you, Ahmed, that the present situation looks bleak for the reason you have mentioned. I also don't think it makes much sense, actually, to go to Palestinian elections in the present situation. What are they then actually voting for in terms of a total divided Palestinian polity? We first have to put some pieces together. I agree. And that's what I try to do, also, in terms of what I have been sharing with you tonight. Then maybe Palestinian elections serve a certain purpose again. Yes. Could serve a certain purpose. And I don't believe that you can actually resolve your issues the way you are actually going about them today. And that means a one-state reality on your side, your contribution to a one-state reality. So that's why I think that the Palestinian elections are important. Now, about your questions from the student, I was so happy actually to hear that, because we need young people, we need empathy. I hope that this very meeting, whether you're young or old, has helped you to better understand and also better understand the other point of view. It is, as a diplomat, it has had to be part of me, also of my job. If you can't understand both sides, what their red lines are, their needs, you will very quickly hit a certain bottom. So I think these meetings contribute to it. And yes, there is a sense of urgency. I think we have all been emanating that.
Thank you, and I think that with that note, we'll come to the end of this debate tonight. Thank you very much for this invigorating discussion, and I'm glad that it's been qualified as a more constructive meeting than the one that might have taken place in Washington tonight. That's at least what we have been aiming for, a constructive discussion, and I would also like to offer my heartfelt thanks to all of you for coming here tonight and for contributing to this. As usual, you are welcome to stay and have a drink with us afterwards and perhaps continue some discussions in an informal setting. For those of you who are interested in Mr. Serry's book, they can find it on the desk near the entrance where the wardrobe is. I would like to thank everyone who has made this night possible, the staff of the Hoed, also my assistant, Dominique Kok, who has worked very hard on organizing tonight's lecture. And then, of course, we are very grateful to our distinguished speakers tonight. It's been wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for making the effort to travel to Amsterdam in order to share your expertise, your insights, and your creative ideas with us. We very much appreciate it, and please give them a warm round of applause.